It's surprisingly difficult to be here and talk to you. And I feel myself being very emotional because I see so many friends and people that I consider family in the audience, and it brings me back to a time very, very long ago that was my life as I lived it. And so this is actually a pretty emotional thing. So my name is Kate Fialkowski, and my brief introduction is that my family, we're originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and my family was part of the Park court case. But what I'm going to talk to you about is really the side of the families and what was really happening as those things were progressing through the courts. And so I have a few stories to share with you. I think it's really critical at this specific time that we remember our history. We always say that we should remember our history or we're doomed to repeat ourselves, and I fear that we are on the verge of repeating ourselves. And so this is a very critical time for us to remember what it was like. This is a time before IDEA, before a free and appropriate public education, before ADA. And these are things that many people are taking for granted now as things just like the air that they breathe. And I just want to point out really that it took quite a lot to get these things. There were not only sacrifices and hours that people worked and the volume of pages that were legal documents, but they were really the sacrifices, blood, sweat, tears, and even the lost lives of individuals who were involved in this process. And that is what it took in order for us to win the rights and privileges that we have today. And all of these can be lost in the blink of an eye. I have some opening remarks, and you just have to bear with me because I just have to do this. I really want to celebrate the contributions of a great number of people, certainly, of course, Tom. And I'm going to mention some people, and I know I'm going to forget a lot more. But the people that I would like to remember are first the mothers who were involved, because at this period of time in the 1960s, let's face it, it was the mothers who were out there fighting for their children and fighting for the lives of their children. So mothers like my mother, Leona Fialkowski, Ginny Thornburg, for example, Eleanor Elkin, Dee Kachia, Maureen Devaney, and the hundreds and thousands of other mothers that were out there at the time. There were lawyers who became members of our families, lawyers like Tom and Frank, and Ed Titterton was on the team, Judith Gran, for example. There were so many lawyers all around the country who were involved in this. There were scholars that you mentioned earlier, so scholars like Lou Brown, Ian Pumpian. Does anybody remember that? I mean, I feel like I was young and all of you guys were like 20 when you were in my house, so it's kind of a bizarre little retrospective right now. And also I want to mention the reporters, so not just Bill Baldini, but in every major newspaper across the United States, papers like the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and even down to the little neighborhood papers in the days before Facebook. We had neighborhood papers, and ours was called the News Gleaner. And these stories were not just, quote, public interest stories. They were important stories of the time, and they were given not just inches of newspaper space, but they were given pages and pages and pages of newspaper space. There were probably 1,000 people, and I am not exaggerating. I grew up in a row house in Philadelphia with one bathroom, 3 small bedrooms. And there must have been at least 1,000 people who came through my house in a 15-year period. We had tiles in the ceiling, and they were all burnt from the newspaper cameras that came in. The professionals who came in, like Lou Brown, spent days and hours and months studying my brothers for signs of, quote, educability. The question was, can these children be educated? And that was a fundamental question. So I just want to say all of that as a prefatory remark because of how massive, how totally massive this undertaking was, and how many of us it took to speak up So it wasn't just one group of people in one small part of the United States, but the tens of thousands around the country who participated together in unlikely coalitions who brought this to the foreground of the United States consciousness. And of course, in my prefatory remarks, I also have to make a public service announcement that Temple University has captured a lot of oral histories on their Visionary Voices website. And I myself have rewatched many of them, and it's really a valuable history that I would encourage everybody to watch.
And the coincidence is that Tom is one of the people, a wonderful interview that your group did.
Yes, I'm sure there will be many parts of things that Tom will allude to during the course of today. And that interview in particular is very extensive, and there are also transcripts. So if you don't want to sit through the interviews, some people prefer to read transcripts. The transcript option is available as well. Okay, so actually that really was cathartic for me, so I could kind of get over my emotionalism. I want to start with just recounting some things before the court case. And so in 1968, my mother started a program at a school called Longfellow School in Philadelphia. And in order for my mother to get that program, we were at the Board of Education probably on a weekly basis to say there were no school programs, can't we have a school program? And finally, we received permission to have a school program where children with significant, then called multiple handicaps, were allowed inside a school building. Now, the school was closed. It was during the summer months. Back then, we had no air conditioning. I know some people remember these days. So the temperature was about 90 degrees outside. I had at the time two brothers with significant disabilities, David and Walter. Walter was 14 years old-ish. I was 4, so my memory might be a little off. Walter was 14 or 15 years old, and David was 6 years old. And among their disabilities, they both had cerebral palsy, and we had to go up multiple flights of steps to get to the designated classroom. And every day we would go down the street. My mother would take my brothers in a red wagon. There were no wheelchairs or anything like that. We went in the red wagon down to the school. My mother parked the wagon at the bottom of the steps, carried my brother Walter up multiple flights of steps, came down this flight of steps, carried up my brother David multiple flights of steps to get to the classroom every single day. There were 10 or 11 children in that particular classroom. It was the first classroom. And I want to tell you that every single one was so excited to be there. And I also want to tell you that what was in that room was absolutely nothing except the children and their mothers and chairs. And that was it. And it was a great victory. It was a tremendous victory. So I want to share with you, this is from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Sunday, November 10th, 1968, this article, "The Hopeless Advance at Longfellow." And I want to point this out. This is a picture of my mother, my brother David, my brother Walter, and the teacher who was designated at the time. I just want to use this as an example of what nothing looks like, because what this was is these were children who were designated as, quote, hopeless but lucky, because they were children who were, quote, considered hopeless, it is in quotes, considered hopeless, but through this program they were lucky because they were actually in a school. And what this program proved was that children with significant disabilities could learn something. And everyone thought they could learn nothing at all. From the time that they were the youngest possible age, as soon as they received this kind of label, it was assumed that there was nothing further and that they had crested at 2 years old, that was the pinnacle of their life would be how they were at 2 years old. So this little classroom with 10 little students that was empty of nothing, empty of anything except for chairs, proved a point that children with the most significant disabilities could learn. The things that excluded these children from a school environment were things like, for example, incontinence. If a child was incontinent, then they were not allowed in a schoolroom. If the child could not climb multiple flights of steps to get to their classroom, they were not allowed in the schoolroom. If the child had a diagnosis, they were not allowed in the schoolroom. So this particular program, a daily school experience 5 days a week, at that time in 1968, was totally unique. It was unique in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and considered to be unique in the country at the time. To quote that article, this proved that children with, as the article says, flawed minds and bodies are not hopeless, nor do they have to be helpless. It's very emotional for me. You know, it is very emotional. I was 4 years old, as I said, and to walk into that classroom and to experience that was the beginning of my life as I know it. So I just want to say, I'm going to fast forward to the Park case, and I'm not going to get into all the details of the Park case. There's certainly greater minds and greater experts here. But the part that has always struck me about the Park Court case was just the language in the petition, and I'm just going to share one of them with you. This is the non-education of Nancy Beth Bowman. And each one of the plaintiffs in the first Park Court case was introduced in this way: the non-education of Nancy Beth Bowman. Nancy Beth Bowman, born December 12th, 1950, and I'm reading it directly from the petition, so please excuse any language that I'm using, has been assigned an intelligence quotient of approximately 55. From 2.5 to 6 years of age, Nancy Beth Bowman and her parents, at her parents' expense, attended private school from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., 5 days a week. Later, she attended the day school of the Montgomery County Association of Retarded Children. During this early schooling, Nancy Beth Bowman learned the rudiments of reading and counting. She became toilet trained and learned table manners. When Nancy Beth Bowman was 8 years of age, the school psychologist of the Abington School District announced that she could not stay in school and recommended long-term placement to her parents. Her parents have not been informed by the school district whether she was excluded or excused from the public schools. Since her placement at the Pennhurst State School in 1960, Nancy Beth Bowman has received no educational instruction, nor is any now being provided. I find that emotional as well. I think it speaks for itself. This is so very profound, the non-education, and I really want to just repeat what that means. I want us to consider what that meant for a child who was 5 years old or 8 years old to receive absolutely nothing, to be taken from their family, to be institutionalized, and for so many of these children to never see their family again. They were just babies. How very profound that is. So I read, over the years, I have the luxury now of being able to Google all of this. And through the years, I've been watching how this case continues to appear, right? And commentary continues to appear on it. And when I read the summaries, it all sounds so fast, doesn't it? It sounds like we went to court, there was a court case, it was all over, yay. Oh my gosh, I can just tell you, this was my entire life. So from the time of when I was 4 years old until the time that I graduated from high school, my family was in court. the entire time. The entire time. From 1968 to 1982, we were in court. No one went willingly on this journey. As we've already mentioned, the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Citizens, the national chapter of the ARC, our community of disability advocates was greatly divided on this. People hated our families who were involved in this court case. My recollection, I spent my early years sitting in courtrooms also. I mean, I remember our conversations at home at night when my family was going to give depositions, and the brutality that was inflicted on my parents during their deposition was extraordinary. So I just want to point out, not by our lawyers, I just want to point out that this was such a very, very contentious time. And I want to point out some things that happened. The Park Court case happened. Okay, now we have to go to school. But here's what we found in going to school. There weren't no there there. There weren't no there there. And it wasn't really much different than the program in 1968. What we had in our school programs were, for example, generosity from neighborhood organizations like the Police and Fire Association, the Frankfurt Arsenal, the women's clubs, the women's auxiliaries. These organizations gave money to be able to fund things like equipment. Our pediatrician gave services to the families just for health checkups for the children who were in the programs. The classrooms had no equipment, and the teachers had no training. So I just want to point out an article. I'm going to skip ahead because I know other people are filling in extra details. This is from 1981, so 10 years after the first Park Court case. Again, I apologize for the language. I'm just reading directly from the article here. School made retarded girl worse, mother says. And this is a story that I'm pointing out is about Gina Cochia in the classroom and how simply by virtue of going to school, our brothers and sisters actually regressed by going to the classroom. So I can tell you, my brother David and Walter went to the same school that I was in. They went to Sullivan, which was my elementary school. And my parents said every day, will you please go look and check in on them? And what I found with my two brothers, was that first of all, they were sitting in a room nowhere near anybody else. Other stories will tell you where family members were. Sometimes they were down in boiler rooms. Sometimes they were in closets that had been converted. Sometimes they were in the room. We used to have rooms off the restroom that were kind of restroom lounges that had been converted. It wasn't a classroom per se that had been given. And when I checked on my brothers, what I found was my two brothers were seated in two chairs and strapped into the two chairs for their safety, When the education started, there were things like someone trying to teach my brothers to cut pictures out of papers or, things like that, like arts and crafts assignments, things like that. So anyway, I just want to point that out, that what we found was not a great victory after the first Park Court case, but it was actually still a continuation of the non-education of our family members. Also in the summary, sometimes it looks like Park 2 was really just some little modification that happened that was paperwork. I'm sure Tom and others will give you more details about the second Park Court case. The second case is really the part of Park that my family was involved directly in. And that second part of the case, what's relevant to us is it mandated that all children, all meaning all, had a right to a free and appropriate public education. And that was really a seminal change that happened because it really did mean education for all and free and appropriate public education. Part 2, petitioners will show what we wanted to show, that compliance with this obligation has been superficial at best. The vast majority of petitioners are relegated to segregated centers. For those who attend programs in schools, also attended by non-handicapped peers, even the most obvious opportunities for association and social learning are foregone, and they remain segregated as a practical matter. Petitioners appear before the court to secure state respondents' ultimate and non-delegable responsibility to ensure compliance with the mandates of park decrees and of federal law. That responsibility is clearly established by the court orders. It is the Commonwealth's obligation to place each mentally retarded child in a free public program of education and training appropriate to the child's capacity. (1982), schools told to teach skills to disabled. Full stop. This was a lifetime of work by thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And it could be gone in the blink of an eye. Thank you.